My name is Detective Pierce. By now, I've seen horror crawl from cellars, rise from forests, and hide behind the smiles of neighbors who swore they were innocent. Yet nothing in those dark alleys or damp villages prepared me for the silence that lurked 30,000 feet above the ground. I hadn't boarded the plane as a detective. I had boarded as a man who needed rest. A transcontinental flight, 12 hours trapped in a metal cylinder with strangers, nothing but the whine of engines and the flicker of cabin lights for company. I had thought it would be uneventful. Perhaps a chance to read, to drift into uneasy sleep. But when I stepped aboard Flight 709, I felt it immediately, the stillness, like a room that had been waiting too long for someone to notice it wasn't empty. The boarding was ordinary enough. A tired crowd shuffled down the jet bridge, clutching passports, bags, and boarding passes. Families corralled their children, businessmen barked into phones, couples whispered promises of where they'd go once the plane touched down. The mundane chaos of travel. But under it, there was something else, something in the way people hesitated before crossing the threshold, as if they sensed what I did. I was seated in 14A, a window seat over the wing. I stowed my bag, fastened the belt, and let my eyes wander the cabin. That's when I began cataloging faces, a habit I cannot break. There was the woman 2 rows ahead, pale and restless, fingers drumming against the armrest in a rhythm too precise to be nervousness. The man across the aisle, his suit crisp, his eyes darting not with anxiety but calculation, like he was measuring everyone else in the room. A boy with headphones too large for his head, mouthing lyrics silently, though his lips did not match the faint thump I could hear spilling from the speakers. The flight attendants moved with trained grace, smiles plastered thin over fatigue. But one of them, a tall man with sharp cheekbones, never looked anyone directly in the eye. His gaze lingered just above heads, as if watching something perched on us that the rest of us couldn't see. We pushed back from the gate. The engines roared. As the plane climbed, I felt the usual pull in my chest, the weight pressing me into the seat. The city lights fell away, swallowed by the night. For a moment, everything was as it should be, the hum of engines, the polite chatter of strangers, the faint clink of ice and plastic cups. And then the first wrong thing happened. At 38,000 feet, the intercom crackled to life. The captain's voice emerged, calm, practiced, almost soothing. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight." Polite applause followed. A few passengers shifted, removing seatbelts, pulling out laptops, ordering drinks. But then the voice came again. The exact same words, same tone, same pauses. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight." At first, people laughed. A glitch. Someone nudged their neighbor, rolled their eyes. But the voice repeated it again and again. Each time identical, each syllable clipped in the exact same way. Not live speech. A recording. And someone, or something, kept pressing play. On the 6th repetition, the intercom cut with a sharp click, like a line being severed. Silence flooded the cabin, thicker than the droning engines. People shifted uncomfortably. The flight attendants moved quickly, offering drinks, pretending nothing had happened. But the smiles faltered. Their eyes betrayed unease. I leaned back, watching. This wasn't just malfunction. This was ritual. Someone wanted us lulled, unsettled, caught in the repetition until we no longer trusted the difference between announcement and echo. Half an hour later, the second wrong thing came. The boy with the oversized headphones, seat 16C, vanished. I don't mean he got up and wandered to the restroom. I mean one moment he was there, slouched, eyes half closed, head bobbing. The next, his seat was empty. Headphones lay coiled neatly on the cushion. His soda cup still sat in the holder, condensation wetting the tray. No one had seen him move. The man beside him swore he hadn't blinked. 1 second the kid was there, the next gone. A flight attendant hurried down the aisle, murmured something about checking the lavatories. But they came back pale, shaking their head. The door had been locked from the outside since takeoff. The captain made no announcement. The attendants whispered among themselves, then returned to smiling as if nothing had happened. But unease spread like smoke. Families pulled children closer. Passengers leaned into one another, whispering theories. A few tried to laugh it off. Probably hiding, kids are like that. But their voices wavered. I stayed silent, observing. Fear reveals more than courage ever could. And what I saw wasn't simple panic. It was recognition. People weren't just scared of what had happened. They were scared because it had happened before. The third wrong thing came soon after. I looked toward the front of the cabin, and there he was, the boy, standing in the galley, staring at us. He wasn't disoriented. He wasn't frightened. He just stood, rigid, eyes locked on nothing. His lips moved slightly, whispering words I couldn't hear. One of the attendants touched his shoulder, gently, as you would a sleepwalker. And then every light in the cabin flickered. The screens on the seatbacks glitched, showing flashes of static, then faces, brief, distorted, stretched by digital noise. Faces of passengers. Ours. But wrong. Smiling too wide, eyes too black, teeth too many. Each face flickered for less than a second, then disappeared. When the light steadied, the boy was back in his seat, headphones on, as though he had never left. Some passengers screamed. Others prayed. The attendants hushed them, insisting there had been a power surge. But when I looked at the boy again, his lips were still moving, whispering words not meant for human ears. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment, piecing the fragments. A voice that repeats itself until it loses meaning. A boy who vanishes and returns unchanged. Faces distorted, replaced, revealed only in glitches. It wasn't turbulence in the sky we had to fear. It was turbulence in reality itself. And somewhere, behind the calm smile of the crew and the hum of the engines, something was guiding us into it. The hum of the engines was steady, hypnotic, almost comforting, until you realized it was the only sound that hadn't changed since takeoff. Conversations had grown shorter, nervous. Laughter had died completely. People shifted in their seats, restless, caught between trying to convince themselves this was nothing and knowing deep down it was already too late. I leaned forward, elbows resting on my knees, eyes half closed but alert. I've learned that panic blinds you faster than darkness, and on this flight, I couldn't afford to miss the details. The boy in 16C sat motionless now, his headphones perched on his head, but his lips still whispered. No one else seemed to notice, or maybe no one wanted to. Fear makes people selective. They ignore what they cannot explain. The pale woman 2 rows ahead of me was trembling. She had a rosary wrapped around her fingers, though she tried to hide it in her lap. Beside her, a man, perhaps her husband, kept checking his watch as though it mattered, as though time hadn't already abandoned us. I pressed the call button. The attendant who approached was the same tall man with sharp cheekbones, the one who never looked passengers in the eyes. His name tag read Jonas, though the letters looked slightly off, like they'd been etched by someone who didn't quite understand handwriting. "Sir?" His voice was polite, trained, but his pupils didn't contract in the cabin light. They just floated there, dark and unchanging. "Where did the boy go?" I asked calmly, nodding toward 16C. Jonas glanced without really looking. "Sir, he's seated." Everything is fine. Fine. That word again. People always use it when they want to shut down truth. I leaned back, letting it go, for now. But Jonas lingered. His hands tightened behind his back, knuckles pale. He stood too still, like he was waiting for a signal. A scream cut through the cabin. It came from the back. A woman's voice, shrill and desperate. Heads turned, gasps filled the air. I rose immediately, weaving through the narrow aisle. Passengers shrank back, some clutching their seats as though moving would draw attention. The source was seat 27F. The woman there was clawing at her seatbelt, eyes wide in terror. The man beside her, her husband, judging by the matching rings, was gone. Not gone, like in the lavatory. Not gone, like he'd slipped away. His clothes remained, neatly folded on the seat. His watch still ticked on the armrest. His glasses lay carefully on top of his shirt. But his body was absent. The woman's hands shook violently as she screamed his name. Others rushed to help, tugging at her belt, pulling her into the aisle. She collapsed into sobs, repeating, "He was here. He was just here. He said he needed more water." The attendants swarmed, offering blankets, whispering assurances. But I saw their eyes. No surprise. No panic. Only weariness, as if this had happened before. I crouched by the seat, running my hand across the cushion. It was still warm. Whoever, or whatever, took him hadn't done it long ago. But there were no signs of struggle. No torn fabric, no spilled belongings. Just absence. Clean, surgical absence. The passengers around us began murmuring, their voices rising, threads of panic weaving into the air. How is this possible? Why aren't we turning back? What are they hiding? That last one caught my attention. What are they hiding? The attendants insisted she was disoriented, that her husband must have gone to the restroom. But when they tried to lead her forward, she pointed at the seat and shrieked, "Look! His clothes are still here!" That silenced everyone. For the first time, the illusion cracked. Passengers saw what I saw. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. I turned to Jonas. "Why are we still in the air? A passenger has disappeared. Twice now." He blinked slowly. "We cannot divert. We cannot stop. Not until we arrive." "Arrive where?" I pressed. But he only tilted his head, as if the question didn't make sense. The captain still hadn't spoken. The cockpit door loomed at the front, sealed tight. Too tight. Commercial flight doors always look strong, but this one looked reinforced beyond regulation, like it had been welded shut from within. The woman was finally carried forward, trembling under a blanket. Her husband's clothes remained behind, folded as if he'd never existed. I felt eyes on me, the calculating man in the suit, the pale woman with her rosary, even the boy with the headphones. It was as though they all expected me to solve it, to name the thing clawing away at their reality. But I had no answers yet. Only questions. The cabin lights dimmed. Not for sleep, but as though power itself was faltering. The air grew colder. Passengers pulled jackets tighter, rubbed their arms. A faint buzzing filled the air, not from engines, but from everywhere at once, like static creeping into the world. And then, the faces returned. The seat back screens flickered, flashing through images, snapshots of us, passengers caught in eerie still frames. A woman yawning, stretched into a grotesque grin. A child mid-blink, eyes black pits. The suited man leaning back, but with no mouth. I stood, moving closer to one of the screens. And there I was, staring directly back at myself. Same seat. Same angle. But my head was tilted at an unnatural angle, bones bent wrong, jaw unhinged. My reflection smiled in the screen. I did not. A hand gripped my arm. It was the pale woman with the rosary. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Detective Pierce. That's your name, isn't it? You have to stop this." My blood ran cold. "How do you know who I am?" Her eyes darted toward the cockpit door. "Because you've done this before." The engines roared suddenly louder, shaking the cabin. People screamed as overhead compartments rattled. Drinks spilled, lights flickered again. But through it all, the boy in 16C remained calm, whispering to himself, his lips moving faster now, like he was reciting an incantation. I grabbed the woman by the shoulders. "What do you mean I've done this before?" She shook her head, eyes filling with tears. "Every flight. Every time. You try to stop it, but it always happens again." Before I could demand more, a sound split the cabin. Not metal. Not turbulence. A voice. It came from the intercom, distorted, broken, repeating only two words over and over, drowning the engines, drowning thought itself. "Not yet. Not yet. Not yet." The lights went out. The world was gone. That's the only way I can describe the cabin when the lights flickered back on. The hum of the engines remained, but it no longer sounded like flight. It sounded like something vast and alive, breathing around us. I blinked against the sudden glow, eyes scanning quickly. The rows that had been full only moments ago were empty now. Entire families gone. Belongings still in place, coats on armrests, glasses perched on trays, bags half unzipped. But the people had vanished, stripped from existence as cleanly as the man in 27F. The woman with the rosary clutched my sleeve, whispering a prayer so fast it tangled into nonsense. The suited man behind us muttered curses, his control cracking, sweat dripping down his forehead. A child 2 rows forward sobbed uncontrollably, clutching a teddy bear, though the mother who'd held him minutes earlier was gone. I counted. 36 missing. Almost half the plane. And yet the attendants moved calmly, gliding through the aisles with trays of water, their smiles stretched thin like masks stitched too tightly to their faces. They avoided the empty seats entirely, stepping around them as if nothing had changed. "Sit," Jonas told me quietly, appearing at my side. His hands rested lightly on the back of a seat, but his nails were too long, blackened at the tips. "It's safer if you sit." I stood firm. "What's happening to them?" He tilted his head, eyes glinting without reflection. "They're arriving." "Arriving where?" A smile, sharp and joyless. "Not yet." The intercom crackled again, repeating those same words, distorted like broken glass grinding in a throat. "Not yet. Not yet. Not yet." My fists tightened. "I want to speak to the captain." Jonas shook his head slowly. "The captain is busy." I didn't wait for permission. Pushing past him, I strode down the aisle toward the reinforced cockpit door. Passengers turned their heads as I passed, some hopeful, some hollow. The boy in 16C was still whispering, his lips moving faster, his eyes glassy as though he wasn't fully here anymore. The cockpit door loomed like a vault. I pressed my hand against it, cold, unnaturally so, as though metal should not feel this dead. I knocked once. "Captain?" No reply. I knocked harder. "Captain, open the door." Still silence. I drew a breath, forcing my voice to cut through the static hum. "I am Detective Pierce. I demand entry." For a moment, there was nothing. Then, faintly, a sound came from within. A sob. A single, broken sob. I stepped back, heart pounding. The captain was alive. Someone was in there. But why wouldn't they open? Suddenly, a hand clamped around my wrist. It was Jonas again, his grip stronger than steel. His smile was unchanged, but his voice carried weight now, a low growl beneath the words. You do not belong there. I met his gaze evenly. Neither do you. For a heartbeat, his mask slipped. His smile faltered, revealing something stretched and raw beneath. Something that wasn't meant to have a face at all. Before he could respond, a scream tore through the cabin. I spun back just in time to see an entire row, seats 18A through 18F, fold inward, collapsing like paper. The passengers sitting there didn't even have time to scream. They crumpled into themselves, bodies bending, shrinking, until only shadows remained etched into the cushions. When the seats sprang back into place, they were empty. Gasps. Cries. The smell of terror thick in the recycled air. People began rushing for the aisles, shoving toward the exits that couldn't be opened. Chaos erupted. The suited man shoved 2 passengers aside, clawing at the emergency hatch. But the handle burned his hands, blistering skin instantly. He screamed, clutching his palms as smoke curled from his flesh. No exit, Jonas said calmly, watching it unfold. No escape. The boy in 16C rose to his feet. Everyone froze. His whispering stopped, and in the silence that followed, his voice was clear. It's almost time. Every passenger turned toward him. He looked impossibly small in the aisle, his dark hair falling across pale eyes that didn't blink. His lips parted, and he recited words I didn't know, syllables that tasted wrong even to hear. The static in the air thickened, buzzing against our skulls. The rosary woman screamed, throwing the beads at him, but the chain dissolved midair, scattering like dust. I moved toward the boy, slowly, carefully, my voice low. What time? Tell me what you mean. He tilted his head, an imitation of Jonas's unnatural gesture. The flight has to finish. Then the gate opens. Gate? I pressed. But before he could answer, the plane lurched violently. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling, swinging like pendulums. Passengers screamed as luggage crashed from overhead compartments. The hum of the engines shifted, not faltering but deepening, vibrating through our bones like a growl. I staggered, catching myself on a seat, my eyes darting to the windows. The stars were wrong. At first, I thought turbulence had tilted us. But no, the constellations outside weren't constellations at all. They moved. Shifted. Coiled like serpents against the void. I pressed closer to the glass. There was no curve of earth below. No clouds. No sky. Only endless dark and shapes swimming within it. The rosary woman clutched my arm again. We're not flying anymore. She was right. The boy in 16C smiled faintly. We're almost there. Jonas moved toward him, kneeling to eye level. For the first time, the perfect mask softened, reverence flickering across his inhuman features. It will be soon. The boy nodded, satisfied. I felt it then, that familiar shift, the moment when terror sharpens into determination. This wasn't the first time I had stood in the face of the unexplainable. Shadows, horrors, the things people aren't meant to see, they had names once. And anything with a name can be understood. I turned back to the cockpit door, ignoring Jonas's eyes burning into me. The captain was still inside. And if anyone held answers, it was him. But before I could move, the intercom roared back to life, deafening, the same words repeated with impossible force, rattling the cabin walls. Not yet. Not yet. Not yet. The lights flared, then died. And when the darkness lifted again, rows 12 through 20 were gone. Empty. Silent. We were fewer now. Much fewer. And the boy in 16C was no longer whispering. He was watching me. Only me. The silence after the intercom cut was worse than the screams. I forced myself forward, step by step down the aisle, past the empty rows where 30 souls had been only minutes earlier. Their absence pressed heavier than their bodies ever could. The passengers who remained shrank back from me as if proximity to the cockpit meant sharing my fate. Perhaps they weren't wrong. The boy in 16C sat perfectly still, his small frame too composed for his age. His eyes followed me, unblinking, cold. Jonas stood just behind him, tall, patient, his grin carved deeper into his face. But I didn't spare him more than a glance. I reached the cockpit door. Cold again, colder now, as if frost had spread through the metal. My knuckles rapped against it, soundless against the hum that surrounded the cabin. "Captain?" My voice was low, steady. "You're alive? I heard you." For a long moment, nothing answered. Then, "Yes." The word rasped through the door like gravel, thin and cracked. But it was a voice. Human. "I need you to open this door," I said, leaning close. "There's panic out here. People are dying. Whatever's happening, we need to face it together." The voice came again, shaking. "You shouldn't be here." My hand pressed against the lock, testing. Unmoving. "Open it. That's an order." A dry laugh. "Orders don't matter here." Something struck the door from the inside. A heavy thud, followed by another, then silence. My instinct screamed, but I drew a breath and set my shoulder against the frame. It was reinforced, but not invincible. "Move," Jonas's voice said behind me, almost a whisper. "You'll regret looking inside." I ignored him. Dug my heel into the carpet, braced, and slammed my shoulder forward. The frame shuddered but held. Again. Pain flared down my arm. Again. And with the fourth strike, the lock gave way, metal tearing, the door groaning open. The stench hit me first. Rot. Not the smell of flesh exactly, but of something aged beyond rot, something soaked in time and silence. My hand covered my mouth as I stepped inside. The cockpit was wrong. The windows. There should have been sky, clouds, or even the black void we'd seen through the cabin. Instead, they opened into nothingness, blank white, stretching endlessly. No horizon. No stars. Only blank. And the captain. He was in the chair, strapped in, uniform pressed and neat, but his body slumped, thin as paper, skin clinging to bone. His hands gripped the controls, but the fingers were too long, stretched into claws that had fused with the levers, grown into them as if the plane and man were one. His face turned toward me with impossible effort, lips cracking as he spoke. "You shouldn't have come." The co-pilot's seat was empty. No, not empty, occupied by something that wasn't flesh at all. A shadow in the shape of a man, its hands flicking across dials that didn't exist, its form stuttering like bad film. When its head turned, there was no face, only a void with teeth. The captain wheezed. "They wanted a pilot. They wanted someone to steer. But I can't. I can't." "Steer where?" My voice was steady, though my gut churned. The captain's lips trembled. His eyes, sunken hollows, lifted to mine. "The gate. Always the gate. We never land. We never land." I reached for him, but the instant my hand touched his shoulder, his body collapsed. Ash. Dust. Uniform and bone folding inward until nothing remained but straps hanging loose against the chair. The co-pilot's shadow turned toward me fully now. My breath caught as its form rippled, shuddering, almost recognizing me. Then its mouth opened, rows of teeth grinding, and the intercom in the cabin screamed alive. Not yet! Not yet! Not yet! The sound hammered against my skull. I stumbled back into the aisle, clutching the frame. The passengers shrieked as lights overhead burst one by one, sparks raining down. Jonas hadn't moved. He watched me with amusement, hands folded neatly. Satisfied? I ignored him, turning back to the door, but the cockpit was gone. Where the chairs and panels had been was now only white. Blinding, endless. No door, no captain, no shadow. Just blank. And then the entire frame folded inward, vanishing as if it had never existed. The passengers' cries grew frantic. The suited man was on his knees, praying to no one. The rosary woman had fainted. The child with the teddy clung to an empty seat, rocking. The boy in 16C rose again. His voice carried over the chaos, clear, sharp. It's almost time. I pushed down the panic gnawing in my chest, forcing reason through the madness. Time for what? Tell me. His eyes narrowed, small lips parting with precision. The arrival. I stepped closer. Arrival where? But his gaze shifted past me, to the window. I followed it, and froze. The void outside had changed. It wasn't blank anymore. It writhed. Shapes coiled, massive and slow, their outlines only partly real. Too many eyes. Too many limbs. Stars blinked in and out like breathing. Something vast, something older than language, pressed against the thin glass of our world. And in that moment I understood. This flight was no accident. It was no malfunction. It was a ritual. A vessel not of steel but of sacrifice. The missing passengers were not vanishing, they were being given, one row at a time. To keep the gate opening. To keep that thing waiting beyond the windows fed. Jonas smiled wider, his perfect teeth glinting as though he had plucked the thought straight from my head. You see now. You understand. This is what we are. I clenched my fists, jaw tight. No. This is what you are. Not me. His laugh was low, warm, like a father indulging a child. And yet here you are. Witness. Participant. The boy in 16C raised his arms, and the plane tilted sharply, passengers screaming as trays and bags slammed against the floor. The void outside pulsed, closer now, pressing against the glass like a tide against a fragile dam. The intercom roared again, words overlapping, deepening, changing. Not yet. Not yet. Not yet, arrival soon. The lights flickered, and another 3 rows vanished. Gone. I caught myself against the overhead bin, my breath ragged. Only a handful of us left now. Dozens reduced to nothing. But if this was a ritual, if it had rules, then it could be broken. I looked back at the boy. His lips moved in that strange language again, syllables shaping reality around us. Jonas leaned close, listening with rapture. If I wanted answers, if I wanted survival, I had to stop them both. And quickly. The plane screamed. Not the passengers, though they screamed too, but the fuselage itself. A long, metallic shriek rolled through the cabin as though the aircraft were being bent by unseen hands. The lights above us burst in a cascade, leaving only the pale glow of emergency strips running down the aisle. I braced against the swaying, my eyes fixed on the boy in 16C. His small frame trembled as he spoke words not meant for any living tongue. His voice wasn't high and boyish anymore. It was layered deep, too many tones echoing from his throat at once. The teddy bear dangled from his other hand, limp and swaying with the turbulence. Beside him, Jonas watched me with the patience of a predator. You can't stop it. he said softly, almost pitying. The gate has already opened. The rest is ceremony. The intercom exploded with sound again, a chorus of voices shouting over one another. Arrival! 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 Rows 18 through 20 vanished in an instant. Seats, passengers, luggage, swallowed into nothing. The air sucked inward with a rush, and the plane jolted violently to compensate, but somehow the hull didn't break. Only 12 of us remained now. I staggered forward, my fingers brushing the back of a seat. The woman with the rosary clutched her beads so tightly they cut into her palms, blood running down her wrists. The suited man was babbling nonsense prayers, eyes white with terror. The child with the teddy was gone now, erased with her mother in the last disappearance. And still the boy in 16C chanted. I forced my voice over the chaos, sharp, commanding. Enough! Stop this! He turned to me then, slowly. His eyes were not eyes anymore, black voids with a faint shimmer deep inside, as though galaxies had been trapped there. His lips curled into something not human. It was never yours to stop. I lunged. The aisle tilted violently as the plane banked, but I caught myself and shoved forward, barreling toward him. Jonas moved instantly, stepping between us with impossible speed. His hand struck my chest like a hammer, sending me sprawling back into the armrest of row 15. My ribs flared with pain, breath tearing from my lungs. He didn't look angry, only disappointed. Detective, you should know better. Violence is a child's answer. This requires surrender. I spat blood onto the carpet. I don't surrender. Jonas smiled faintly. You will. The boy's voice grew louder, reverberating through the plane until the walls themselves seemed to pulse with his words. Outside the windows, the writhing shapes pressed closer. One vast limb dragged across the glass, talons scraping with a sound that made my teeth ache. The intercom blared. Gate unstable. Sacrifice required. Jonas looked back at the boy, then at me. His grin widened. They're asking for you. The remaining passengers cried out, shrinking away from me as though I had suddenly become the threat. Perhaps I had. I pulled myself upright, ribs stabbing with each breath. My hand brushed against the seat pocket, and something inside gave under my fingers. I pulled it free, an oxygen mask coiled loosely. Useless in a ritual, but in a fight, anything could matter. Sacrifice me if you want, I hissed, stepping forward again. But you'll have to earn it. Jonas tilted his head. Gladly. He moved, faster than any human, his body blurring as he reached for me. But this time I was ready. I swung the oxygen mask hard, the metal valve cracking against his temple. He snarled, not in pain, but in annoyance, as black ichor bled from the wound. The boy's chant faltered for a second. The plane shuddered violently, as though the ritual itself had hiccuped. The white void outside rippled. My eyes locked on him. That was the key. If I could break the chant, I could break the gate. I shoved past Jonas, ignoring the pain lancing through me, and dove toward 16C. My hand shot out, clamping over the boy's mouth. His voice muffled instantly, the dark syllables cut short. The effect was immediate. The writhing shapes outside convulsed, pulling back from the plane. The intercom roared in fury. No. 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 Continuity required. Jonas shrieked, no longer human at all, his voice splitting into dozens. His hands clawed at my shoulders, yanking me back with inhuman strength. I tore free, ripping fabric from his suit, and pressed harder against the boy's mouth. The boy's eyes widened, galaxies burning brighter, and then, he bit down. Agony exploded in my hand as his teeth pierced flesh deeper than bone should allow. I screamed, yanking back, blood spilling down my wrist. He rose from his seat without standing, his body lifting straight upward, suspended by nothing, head tilting back as a voice far older than him thundered from his chest. "You cannot break what was never yours." The windows cracked. Thin fractures webbed across the glass, glowing with faint white fire. Wind howled through the seams, shrieking with the voices of the vanished. The woman with the rosary dropped her beads, hands raised in surrender, sobbing. The suited man collapsed, clawing at the floor. The other few passengers pressed back against their seats, too broken to move. And I stood alone in the aisle, blood dripping from my hand, body shaking with pain. But not broken. Not yet. I drew a long breath, steadied myself, and met the boy's endless eyes. "If this plane is the ritual, then I'll burn the whole damn thing down." For the first time, Jonas's smile faltered. The boy hissed, and the plane tilted nose down, plummeting into the void. Gravity wrenched us toward the front, screams filling the cabin. The intercom roared again. "Arrival imminent. Sacrifice finalized." But my resolve hardened. If they wanted a sacrifice, I would give them one. On my own terms. The nose of the plane dipped hard. My stomach lurched as gravity dragged me forward, the world tilting into a screaming plunge. Loose trays, cups, and luggage shot through the air, colliding with seats, passengers, and walls. Someone cried out as a metal case struck their skull, but the sound was lost in the hurricane roar of descent. I forced myself upright, one hand gripping the top of a seat, blood dripping freely from the wound the boy had left in my palm. My lungs burned, ribs screaming, but adrenaline kept me moving. The boy floated still, suspended in the aisle, head tilted back as words thundered from his mouth that no human vocal cords could form. Jonas stood behind him, smiling again, his eyes fixed on me with something between triumph and hunger. "You can fight all you want, detective," he shouted over the roar. "But the destination is chosen. The gate will open." I snarled back. "Not if I crash us before we get there." Jonas's smile twitched. Just enough. Enough to tell me I was right. The cockpit. If I could get to it, if I could take control of the plane, or worse, destroy it, I could deny them what they wanted. I lunged toward the front, fighting against the downward pull of the dive. The emergency strip lights flickered wildly beneath my boots, glowing an unholy green now instead of white, as if mocking the idea of safety. Jonas moved instantly, stepping into the aisle like a wall of flesh and shadow. His arms lengthened unnaturally, fingers blackening into claws. The boy's voice rose in pitch, and the air thickened, pressing against me like invisible water. Every step became a battle. My wounds screamed. My body begged to collapse. But my mind remembered why I was here. I wasn't just a passenger. I wasn't just prey. I was Detective Pierce. And I would not let them win. With a roar, I hurled myself forward, shoving a seat loose from its bolts, and slamming it into Jonas with everything I had. He staggered, not far, but enough. I squeezed past him, my shoulder tearing against his claw as it raked across me. Fire burst in my side. Warm blood soaked my shirt. But I was through. The cockpit door loomed ahead, swaying wildly with the violent descent. Behind me, Jonas's voice bellowed. "Pierce! If you touch that door, you will end us all." "Good," I rasped. I slammed into the cockpit, shoulder first. The door didn't budge. Reinforced, locked. My vision swam with pain. I pulled back, kicked, again and again, until my boot tore at the latch. The boy's chanting grew frantic, the syllables now more like screams. The plane shuddered harder, metal groaning as though something outside was clawing against it. Through the windows, I could see the gate forming now, a massive ring of pale light in the void, wide enough to swallow the entire aircraft. Shapes writhed within it, eager. Waiting. The intercom erupted again. Arrival. Finalize arrival. I kicked one last time. The cockpit door buckled, then burst inward. I staggered inside. The sight nearly drove me to madness. The pilots were gone. Only their uniforms remained, neatly folded on the seats, headsets resting on top. No flesh. No bone. No blood. Just absence. And the controls. The yoke moved on its own, jerking violently as invisible hands steered the plane straight toward the blazing maw of the gate. No, I whispered, staggering forward. I grabbed the yoke, fighting it. The force against me was immense, as though an ocean current surged through the controls, dragging us forward. My wounded hand slipped on the blood-slick surface, but I clamped down harder with the other. My muscles screamed. Behind me, I heard Jonas enter the doorway. Do you see now, Pierce? Even if you resist, you assist. Every struggle only strengthens the inevitability. I gritted my teeth, forcing the yoke upward. Then let's see how inevitable this feels. The plane bucked. Alarms screamed through the cockpit as I forced the nose up, fighting against the invisible grip. The void outside tilted, the gates slipping out of direct alignment. The entities beyond shrieked in fury, pounding against unseen barriers. The boy's chant faltered again. I seized the moment. With my good hand, I slammed the throttle forward. The engines roared, straining with unnatural power, and the plane lurched higher. Jonas hissed, stepping fully into the cockpit now, his shadow swelling to fill the walls. You'll tear the craft apart. You'll kill everyone. I spat blood onto the floor. Better me than them. He lunged. I twisted, grabbing the fire extinguisher from beneath the co-pilot's seat. With a cry, I swung it straight into his head. The metal cylinder connected with a wet crunch, sending him sprawling against the wall. Black ichor sprayed across the cockpit glass, sizzling like acid. The boy screamed, voice cracking into something raw, desperate. His body convulsed midair, slammed against the ceiling, and then, he was thrown violently down the aisle, as though the plane itself had rejected him. The chanting stopped. The gate flickered. The entities outside shrieked in unison, clawing at the edges of reality to hold it open. The intercom erupted with static so violent it rattled my skull. Stability lost. Sacrifice required. Sacrifice required. Jonas rose again, black eyes blazing, ichor dripping from his ruined skull. His smile was gone now, replaced by rage. You fool! You think you've stopped it? You've only made them hungry! And then the first one came through. The glass of the cockpit bulged inward, then split with a sound like tearing flesh. A hand, if it could be called that, pushed through. Long, skeletal fingers, jointed wrong, tipped with talons that bent like hooks. The air filled with a stench like rotting stars. The woman with the rosary screamed behind me. Passengers clawed at their belts, sobbing, broken. And I held the yoke steady, breath ragged, eyes locked on the impossible. If they wanted me to be a sacrifice, I would make it count. The cockpit groaned under the impossible weight of intrusion. The window bulged again, bending inward like rubber, though I knew it was reinforced glass meant to withstand storms and pressure changes. But this was no storm. This was something else. The hand, too long, too skeletal, slid deeper inside, talons scraping the yoke, leaving black trails that hissed and smoked on contact. My grip tightened as the smell of ozone and rot hit my lungs, forcing a cough that tasted of blood. Behind me, Jonas staggered to his feet. His head was half caved from the extinguisher strike, ichor leaking down his shirt like oil, but he smiled once more, a grotesque parody of triumph. "Behold it, Pierce," he said, voice distorted, reverent. "The first of them. The sky breaks for their hunger. You can die resisting, or join in reverence. I'll die fighting," I spat, forcing the yoke upward again. The plane groaned, alarm shrieked, and the engines whined in agony as I fought to keep us climbing. The gate loomed ahead like a wound in the sky, but my angle was off. I was dragging us higher, away from its maw. The hand flexed, curling around the cockpit like a man testing a new glove. The metal screamed. The entire aircraft shuddered as a second arm emerged beside it, jointed backward, claws digging into the roof. Passengers wailed behind me. Some unbuckled and tried to run toward the cockpit, only to be flung backward as the pressure shifted violently. Overhead bins burst open, spewing luggage like shrapnel. The intercom shrieked static, then words, furious and broken. "Sacrifice required. Sacrifice required." The boy's body twitched down the aisle, limbs jerking as though pulled by invisible strings. His mouth opened, jaw hanging too wide, and the chant resumed, but now his voice was not alone. It was layered with hundreds, thousands, as though every dead tongue in existence was speaking through him. I could feel my will eroding, thought dissolving at the edges. The gate wanted me to give in, to let go. And then, a flash. The rosary woman. She stood in the aisle, face pale but eyes defiant, clutching her beads so tightly they cut into her skin. She shouted prayers into the madness, her voice raw but hers. For one brief second, the chant faltered. It was enough. I seized the throttle, jammed it forward. The engines roared so loud the walls trembled. The nose lifted further. The gates slid lower and my vision, shrinking. The entities beyond shrieked, clawing harder, their limbs scraping fire across the fuselage. Jonas lunged at me. We collided against the controls, yoke jerking violently. His claws raked my chest, burning like acid. I slammed my forehead into his ruined skull, then drove the extinguisher into his ribs. He howled but did not fall. His strength was inhuman, unyielding. The glass split further. And then, its head came through. No eyes. No mouth. Only a shifting mass of flesh and void, as though the universe had vomited up a shape it couldn't contain. Its skin rippled with patterns like constellations, stars flickering and dying across its surface. Every passenger screamed at once. The boy's chant rose into a shriek. The intercom roared. "Consume. Arrival. Now." I knew then that this was no ordinary horror. This was ritual, sacrifice, inevitability. And I was the only one holding the scales. I tore the flare gun from beneath the captain's seat. My vision swam, lungs burned, but my arm was steady. Jonas saw it, eyes widening. "No, Pierce, you don't understand." "Go to hell," I said, and fired straight into the thing's face. The flare exploded in white fire. The creature shrieked, not in pain, but in rejection. Fire licked its void skin, the patterns of stars burning away. It recoiled, claw retreating, body spasming halfway between worlds. The cockpit filled with smoke and light, passengers shielding their eyes. The gate flickered. The chant broke. The boy collapsed like a puppet with cut strings, hitting the aisle with a sickening crack. Jonas staggered, ichor boiling on his chest. His eyes turned from rage to terror. "No, you fool! You've undone the bridge. You've made it unstable. Do you know what you've done?" I yanked the yoke back, blood dripping into my eyes. "Yeah. I've ruined your party." The engine screamed. The nose tilted higher. The gate shrank further. The creatures clawed and writhed, but their grip was failing. Jonas's voice broke into a snarl, inhuman. "If we cannot feast, then we'll drag you with us." He lunged again, this time not at me, but at the open cockpit glass, throwing himself into the void. His body tore apart instantly, sucked into the collapsing gate, shredded into streaks of black. The last of the limbs withdrew, shrieking. The gate convulsed. And then it closed. Silence. Only the groan of stressed metal and the steady whine of the engines remained. The night sky stretched infinite, clear. Stars. Real stars. I slumped into the captain's seat, chest heaving, vision dimming. The rosary woman was still standing, still clutching her beads. Her lips moved in silent thanks. The boy lay still. The passengers sobbed in exhausted relief. But I knew. This wasn't over. Not yet. The plane was still plummeting. And I had to land it. The cockpit was eerily quiet. Not the quiet of relief, but the quiet of something watching, of reality bending just enough to whisper doubts into your mind. The plane still shuddered, the engines straining as if trying to scream through the impossibility. I rubbed my face, trying to push away the smoke and exhaustion. Around me, the passengers were huddled together, whispering prayers or muttering nonsense, but none of it touched the fear that had rooted itself deep inside my chest. "Everyone stay calm," I said, voice hoarse, but even I didn't know if it was calm. We're going to get through this." The rosary woman stood in the aisle, clutching her beads like a lifeline. She gave me a small nod, and for a moment, I believed we had a chance. I glanced outside. The night sky was wrong. The stars weren't right. They hung in impossible constellations, some too close, some too bright, others shimmering as if they weren't stars at all but distant eyes, blinking in unison. The horizon shimmered like heat waves over asphalt, yet below, there was no ground, only darkness stretching into infinity. My stomach twisted. I'd flown thousands of hours, but I had never seen anything like this. Not in turbulence, not in storms. This was something else. Something unnatural. "Pierce," the boy whispered from his seat, eyes wide, voice shaking. Is it over?" I shook my head. "No. It's just beginning." Then I saw movement below the plane. Shadows slithered across the darkness like living rivers. They didn't follow any pattern of land or water. They flowed and twisted as if alive, reaching toward the plane, tiny black fingers stretching upward. I tightened my grip on the yoke. "Engines full power! Climb!" The plane responded sluggishly. Something outside was tugging at us, a gravity not of Earth, not of physics as I knew it. My chest burned, arms shaking as I fought to keep the nose up, to resist the pull of that invisible force. The rosary woman began chanting again, low, steady, almost hypnotic. The sound seemed to push back at the darkness outside, a rhythm that made the shadows recoil slightly. I realized I had to trust her. Not the instruments. Not the logic. Her voice was the only anchor to reality. Then came the screaming. Not from the passengers. Not from the boy. From the shadows themselves. A chorus of agony and rage, echoing through the sky, through the metal of the plane, through my very bones. I turned to Jonas, or what remained of him. The void had claimed him, yet fragments of his human form flickered in the cockpit, reaching out, trying to pull me into the darkness. I could smell him, iron, rot, ozone. His voice, layered with thousands of others, hissed in my mind. "You cannot save them. You cannot save yourself. The gate is closed, but the path remains." I slammed my forehead into the controls, pushing the throttle further. The plane surged upward, finally breaking free of the immediate pull. The shadows shrieked but could not follow. Relief was brief. Ahead, the sky shimmered like liquid. Colors rippled unnaturally, and through the haze, I saw forms moving, towers, bridges, figures too tall, too thin, too wrong. The world below was no longer the earth I knew. This was a reflection, a distortion, a place where the rules of reality bent like wet metal. I realized then that the gate hadn't just threatened the plane. It had warped everything beyond it. Our world had cracked. "Pierce, what do we do?" the boy whimpered. I didn't have an answer. I only had instinct. And a grim understanding. Survival meant navigation through this nightmare. Not just the plane, not just the passengers, but the thin barrier of reality itself. "Hold on," I said, though I was not sure if I meant to them or to myself. "We fly through it." The rosary woman began chanting louder, beads clacking like a metronome. The sound was steady, rhythmic, grounding. I followed her lead, trusting her intuition as the instruments failed, as the stars blinked like alien eyes, as the shadows writhed below. The plane shuddered violently. The nose dipped, then rose, responding unpredictably to the unseen currents of this warped sky. I had to fight every instinct, every memory of flight, to keep it level. Every second felt like minutes, every minute felt like hours. And then I saw a clearing ahead, or what appeared to be one. A pocket of calm, a void in the chaos, shimmering like a mirage. It was small, narrow, but stable. If I could reach it, maybe, just maybe, we could survive. "Everyone brace!" I shouted. The boy clutched the rosary woman's hand, passengers holding each other, eyes wide in terror and hope. I pushed the plane toward the clearing. The engine screamed. The warped sky resisted. The shadows below surged upward in final protest. And as we crossed into the calm, I realized something terrifying. This was only the beginning. The sky had been altered, yes, but we had not escaped. Not yet. The gate's influence had seeped into our world, into reality itself. I gritted my teeth. We land, we find out what's real, and we stop it. The plane leveled. The air was still. The passengers were alive. But I knew that whatever awaited us on the ground would test everything we had survived, and everything we thought we knew. The calm didn't last. The pocket of stability we had crossed into was deceptive, a fragile bubble in a sky still tainted by the gate's influence. I could feel the weight of every second pressing down, every heartbeat echoing against the uncertainty that stretched before us. The plane trembled as we descended. Instruments flickered wildly, some dead, some showing impossible readings. Altitude indicators pointed both up and down at the same time. Nothing obeyed logic anymore. "Pierce, it looks like the runway is gone," the rosary woman whispered. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook as she clutched her beads. I followed her gaze. What had been the airport, familiar and structured, was now a smear of concrete, glass, and shadows. Lights warped into twisted shapes, turning runways into rivers of light. Control towers swayed like trees in a storm, yet there was no wind. I swallowed hard. "All right, we improvise. We land where we can. We land, and we survive." Passengers braced themselves. The boy's eyes were wide, fixed on me, searching for reassurance I wasn't sure I could give. I gritted my teeth and focused. Every instinct, every memory of flight training, every emergency procedure drilled into me over decades was now warped, but I had no choice. The descent was harrowing. Shadows from the sky below reached up, brushing against the fuselage, leaving trails of cold that seemed to penetrate the metal. The plane responded sluggishly, as if moving through molasses. Every adjustment of the yoke demanded Herculean effort. "Brace!" I shouted again, though the word felt hollow against the unnatural silence. The wheels touched, something. Not the runway, not the earth, but a solid surface, though it shifted under us like water. The landing gear shuddered, metal screeching in protest. I fought to maintain control, every second a battle against the unseen forces tugging at us. Passengers screamed. Not from the bump, but from the shapes forming around them. Shadows solidified into figures, tall, faceless, reaching out as if to claim us. They hovered on either side of the plane, brushing the wings, their presence making the metal groan. The rosary woman chanted louder. Her voice became a mantra, grounding me, the passengers, even the plane itself. I followed her rhythm, adjusting controls in sync with her words, praying it would be enough. We rolled forward, skimming over the shifting surface. Structures warped into abstract shapes on either side, some resembling buildings, others human forms frozen in grotesque poses. My stomach churned, but my hands stayed firm on the yoke. Ahead, a faint patch of stability appeared. A flat, glowing surface, wide enough for the plane to come to a stop. I focused everything I had on reaching it, ignoring the screams, the shadows, the impossible physics pressing in from all directions. Finally, the wheels touched the stable patch. The plane skidded, sparks flying from contact, metal screeching and groaning, yet it held. Inch by inch, we slowed, guided by instinct and the rosary woman's unyielding chant. At last, the plane came to a complete stop. Silence. Absolute, tense silence, broken only by shallow breathing, the faint whine of engines, and the distant, distorted echo of the gate's influence receding into the warped sky. I exhaled, slumping forward. We made it," I muttered, though the word felt empty. The passengers were shaken but alive. The boy clung to the rosary woman, tears streaming down his face. Shadows had retreated, leaving only warped remnants of the landscape, but I knew it was temporary. The gate's corruption was still out there, waiting, bending reality subtly, invisibly, ready to strike again. I opened the cabin door, peering out. The ground beneath was alien, yet somehow recognizable. Trees bent at impossible angles, structures shimmered, and distant lights flickered like dying stars. We were alive, but we were not safe. The rosary woman stepped forward. "Pierce, the gate's influence spreads. You must follow the source if you want to stop it." I nodded, knowing the journey wasn't over. Landing was only survival. The truth, and the real horror, lay ahead. I tightened my grip on my coat, looked back at the passengers, and then toward the warped horizon. Whatever awaited us, I had a mission, and I would see it through. The warped horizon stretched endlessly, a nightmare of twisted landscapes and shimmering lights. Every instinct screamed that this was the epicenter, the point from which the corruption spread. The passengers were gathered behind me, wary, silent, eyes wide with fear. But I could not let fear dictate my steps. "We move carefully," I said, my voice firm despite the adrenaline racing through me. "Follow my lead, and don't touch anything that looks alive." The rosary woman took the lead, beads clicking rhythmically, her chants low but steady. Her voice was a tether, grounding us as we advanced. Every step on the distorted ground felt like walking on fragile glass, the surface bending and quivering beneath our weight. Ahead, a pillar of light rose, pulsating like a heartbeat. Shadows writhed around it, clawing at the air, forming faces that screamed silently. The gate. Its presence was overwhelming, pressing on my mind, filling my head with visions of endless skies, inverted cities, and lives looping endlessly in despair. I clenched my fists. This ends now. The passengers gasped as the shadows surged toward the light, drawn like moths to a flame. I drew my sidearm, but the bullets felt useless against something that defied physical laws. It was a mental battle now, a fight of focus and willpower. The rosary woman stepped beside me, chanting louder, directing energy toward the pillar. I felt a resonance building, like a rhythm in sync with the gate itself. The pulsating light reacted, rippling violently. I understood then, the gate could be influenced, controlled, if one found the correct anchor. I scanned the area. Among the chaos, one structure remained stable, an old, rusted air traffic control console from the plane's last stop. Instruments flickered with impossible symbols. I ran to it, hands flying over the controls. Somehow, the sequences, the patterns, my mind remembered them instinctively. A low hum filled the air as I initiated the sequence. The pillar trembled, shadows screeching in frustration. Reality buckled, twisting violently around us. Passengers clutched each other, some collapsing in terror, but I pushed on. "Almost there," I whispered. The gate shuddered, pulsing wildly. I could feel its consciousness, alien and malicious, resisting. Memories, fears, and hallucinations assaulted me. The boy's face twisted into my own childhood fear, the plane collapsing under flames and ice simultaneously. I blinked rapidly, forcing my mind to focus, letting the rosary woman's chant guide me like a metronome. With one final press, the light pillar collapsed inward, a vacuum of white-hot brilliance. Shadows screamed, twisting, then vanished as if they had never existed. The air grew calm. The warped horizon dissolved into normality. Trees, structures, and the runway reformed, stable and solid. The passengers gasped, looking around, their fear replaced with awe and disbelief. I stepped forward, exhausted, sweat streaking my face. The rosary woman nodded, her work complete. "It's done, for now. But remember, Pierce, gates never truly close. They wait." I nodded, my mind heavy but resolute. I helped the passengers onto solid ground, checking each one. The boy clung to me briefly, eyes full of gratitude. I offered a small, tired smile. The flight, the terror, the impossible struggle, it was over. But as I looked back at the faint shimmer that lingered on the horizon, I knew this was only one of many battles. My calling was clear now: uncover the anomalies, face the impossible, and protect those caught in between. I turned away, walking toward the waiting authorities who had arrived on the perimeter. Questions would be asked, reports filed, explanations demanded. But some truths were beyond words, beyond comprehension. And that was where I thrived. Detective Pierce, survivor, observer, solver of the unsolvable. This case was closed. But the world was still full of gates, shadows, and whispers waiting to be uncovered. And I would be there when they emerged.